Oh, yes, it is Subway to Shay on YouTube. Yes, we are on video for the first time from the Subway to Shay studios in my office here. Episode 1, exclusive content. You won't get on the podcast. It will be only on YouTube. And kicking us off is a good friend to the Subway to Shay podcast. He was on with me 1 year ago, to this day, actually, if you could believe that. Matt Williams joins us, and Matt is the lead MLB editor for thegameday.com. Matt, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, pretty good. Thanks for having me back. One day a year. It's like Brigadoon. I just appear on the podcast and then I go back into the shadows.
We got to get you on a little more than this. So we'll be talking a lot about fantasy this year, probably get into some DFS as well. But I want to make that a lot more part of the content that I'm going to be bringing to Subway to Shay on YouTube. So I got to ask you to start off. Obviously, we're going to talk about the Mets here and where they land in the fantasy world. How do you have the Mets ranked this year in fantasy? Who's probably at the top for you? And then maybe there's probably about like 5 or 6 guys that you could think would be going in, what top 10 drafts, in drafts with 10 teams and maybe 24 players to pick or 24 rounds to go around.
Yeah, I mean, they got to be one of the more popular teams when it comes to fantasy baseball. They have so many, even without Edwin Diaz, unfortunately, everyone cringes as I say that. Out of order than it usually was, Pete Alonso has actually moved up to the front of the pack. So everyone knows he's been underrated for a couple of years because usually like in power bats and fantasy, sometimes you can get power late, like a Rowdy Tellez or, like in the old days, Joey Gallo, if people love to, swallow that horrible batting average. But as we all know, as Mets fans, Pete has a decent batting average and he has a decent, he always did in the minor leagues. So you can get those 40 plus home runs with like, 260, 270, maybe 280 batting average. So he is the guy that is carrying the most value, at least according to most analysts, experts, and draft ADP. Right behind him is depending on when pitchers go, is a trio of Francisco Lindor, death by 1,000 paper cuts guy. He's not stand out in any category. He's just really good in all of them. And then you got Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer mixed in there as co-aces that are going in that like kind of like a second, third, fourth round, depending on the size of your league. And Starling Marte still hanging around the first like 6-7 rounds because he's still have that speed, even though last year he didn't really show it. He gives you a nice batting average, he scored a ton of runs, and he looks healthy, which is all we really want as Mets fans. But in fantasy, Starling Marte is possibly a steal where he's going, but there's a lot of risk there. So if you do take Marte, you got to prepare for him to miss some time. After those main guys, there's a couple more that are going, several rounds later in Brandon Nimmo and Kodai Senga. So Senga, is a wild card. We don't know, we don't know how many innings he's going to pitch this year, with a 6-man rotation in Japan and everything, but his stuff looks nasty. And where you can get him, like after the Brady Singers of the world have gone off the board, which nothing wrong with Brady Singer, he's fine. But some of those guys that don't have the upside that Senga potentially does, he's a great guy to target. And Nemo is what it is. If they're in a normal fantasy league, like a 5x5 roto or points league, Nemo's great. If you can again bake in the possible missing time. If you're in an on-base percentage league, he's gold, obviously, as well. And after that, we love Jeff. If you're newer to fantasy baseball, you may be thinking, why isn't he brought up Jeff McNeil? He's the batting champion. Yeah, but he doesn't have a ton of power, doesn't have a ton of speed. Those things really matter in fantasy baseball. So McNeil's great. Throw him in there as a second baseman. Give you a lot of batting average, but he'll definitely be drafted in all leagues. But he'll be going after the rest of the pack. And then after that, if you just need saves, David Robertson looks like the guy. So he's being drafted kind of. He's been shooting up draft boards like crazy since the Diaz situation, because you got to assume that he will likely be running into. He will likely be running the show, but again, at his age and his injury issues, if you are in a deeper league, who could it be? I mean, Ottavino could be the guy. I would think they might even save him just to be maybe in that 8th inning area. If Drew Smith, I think we all know he probably has the stuff to
Mhm.
naturally fit into a closer position. So if you're in a deep league there, Brooks Raley even, he's the only lefty. So if they're going to mix and match possibly, and there's, you're facing the Phillies who are loaded with lefties, maybe Raley picks up some saves. So if you're in a deeper format, we know saves are hard to come by. You kind of want to keep all those guys on the watch list because I would assume Robertson gets first crack and gets the most of them. But in the end, I think you see quite a few Mets with saves on their stat sheet by the end of the year.
Yeah, I went two different ways in two different drafts. This is my like reemergence into fantasy baseball. I haven't played it in probably over a decade, and I just started to get back into it this season because I also did a fantasy hockey season, currently in a championship right now. So I wanted to get back into fantasy baseball because I loved playing it when I was in high school and college. But when you mentioned the closers, one of my leagues, I kind of prioritized closing, and the other one I didn't so much and went more with starting pitching. So when it came towards the end of the draft, I did take, David Robertson. He was one of the guys that I took, but I also, like you had mentioned, I kind of, start off Adam Ottavino just in case, Brooks Raley, Andrew Smith, because like you said, those guys could quite possibly see some save action.
Yeah, you really don't know what Buck Showalter has in mind. He typically has gone with a closer in the past, but again, we mentioned just David Robertson. He's 38 years old. He's had some injury history, so even if he's doing well, he ain't going to roll out there every day like Edwin was. So that at minimum, he'll get more days off. And you don't know if they're just going to automatically move Ottavino up. He doesn't necessarily have like the closer like setup or skill set. Like I said, Drew Smith out of everyone, even David Robertson. Obviously, Robertson has the track record and he's done it before. He has the experience. But Drew Smith, if he can figure things out, I mean, he looks like he's built to be a closer. So yeah, I mean, in addition to those four, I'm sure other guys will get chances too as the year goes on. But yeah, I would say that it'll kind of be a Rolodex of sorts with Robertson leading the way.
It's so crazy to see how the change was once Edwin Diaz went down, where, the closers were after that. I mean, I figured the top of the heap was, and I drafted him, was Emmanuel Clase. And then after that, if you don't get, a Devin Williams or a Josh Hader, you're really looking towards, the Craig Krimbles of the world, Kenley Jansen, and then the next tier would be probably David Robertson. So you're not going to get the guys with the 30, 40, possibly 50 potential saves. You're going to get, 30 and 20, and sometimes even less than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few other guys up there like Ryan Presley, and I mean, there's then there's the Bednar Barlow area, and there's a lot of names in general, but more and more year after year, less and less teams are even giving that one guy the save out. Like no matter who it is, most teams you're going to have a second person with maybe 10 to 15 saves. And I'm not talking about like the Rays who go all crazy with, just like throwing a bunch of people out there. I'm just saying in general, you don't know what to do. The Seattle, everyone loves Andres Munoz. Everyone likes Duran on the Twins, but in reality, I mean, those high strikeout guys, they could be using like those high leverage seventh, eighth inning. So then Jorge Lopez on the Twins, he might end up, probably leading the team in actual saves, even though Duran is a superior pitcher. It's kind of the same thing on a lot of different teams. So, yeah, you got to be careful. That's why closers are going so much earlier. When back in the day when the 06010 show on ESPN when Matthew Berry was doing baseball, it was always do not pay for saves. They always come into the league, which is true. But everyone needs them. So if you're in a fab league or waiver wire, everyone, sometimes it's hard to pick them up. So it is nice to try to lock those guys down. So yeah, saves. Just get rid of saves as a stat. I'm not going to worry about this.
Well, now that also they have hold as well.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of leagues they save plus holds, which is nice. Some people don't like them because they think it like removes some of the strategy of having to account for closer. But I personally like a format where you're trying to draft the best players. I mean, there's some fantasy leagues out there, especially like, high stakes, like NFBC, like the ones we're paying a lot of money.
Yep.
There's two catchers. Like, Why do we have two catchers? Why are we doing that? They're the worst. There's typically the worst hitter on the field, and we're gonna get two of them. So yeah, I prefer to have formats where you're rewarding good players.
Well, even with, the closers, mostly just garnering either saves, ERA, could you possibly get away with no relief pitching and just go starters and maybe you just lose out on the saves?
It's difficult in a 10 team league. It's in a shallow league like that. It's easier because you only have like in Roto you only have the 10 points to make up. In points leagues, completely different. Because I mean the two main primary kinds of fantasy is Roto, where there's, let's say, for saves, there's 10 teams in a league. And it's just a matter of, if you have the most saves, you get 10 points. If you have the second most saves, you get 9 points. The last person in saves get 1 point. But in a points league, it does not matter where the points come from. You like get a point for a strikeout and for a save and for a win, and a -1 for, a hit against or an earned run against, depending on what your settings are. So in a points league, you can do whatever you want. You just rack up the points no matter how you can get them. In a Roto league, you can't really completely punt because you really got to do well in other areas. I mean, people do it, but you really want to at least get like a little bit in there and compete, like, try to get to at least the bottom third, middle of the table in every category you can. But so I'd say you try in Roto, it's not the best thing to punt, but in points leagues, you can absolutely do whatever you want.
Yeah, I had to smile a little bit when you brought up, the rest of the closers, because as I was going through them and checking in on their, predictions and stuff like that, it was, hey, he might be closing, but he also might be part of a closer by committee. And there was a lot of those, whether it was even with the Yankees with Clay Holmes, he might not be the closer the whole time. And you got out in Chicago with Michael Fulmer, he might not be the closer there. Seattle might not just go with Paul Sewald. So there's a lot of closer by committee that's been going on. With the Mets, going back to the Mets, are there any, I want to say, hidden gems that you can take in the later rounds that, might not be getting hype right now? So in my 10-team league, my last pick, and I'm stashing him on the bench, I took Brett Beatty with the possibility of him might be coming up. Is that something that, you would do in a deep league like that?
In a deep league, sure. If you're like 15 teams, I would. Anything in 12, 10 or 12s, it depends on how deep your bench is, if you have IL spots, because you got to be able to fill, you got to be able to like have usable players around. So yes, I mean I think he's definitely one of the top stashes. I mean, so many rookies like Colas, Walker, all these guys have been brought up by their teams, but Beatty, we think, is going to be coming up sooner rather than later. So, yeah, if you can, absolutely try to stash him. Third base is in a very deep position, and you got to love his Freddie Freeman-esque skill set. When you're dreaming about what he can do. So, yeah, he's someone you definitely want to stash if you can in those deeper formats. I mean, you get in your own head as a fan of a team, so it depends. He's been around a while. I don't know how a lot of Mets fans feel about David Peterson. We know we all love him, but as far as his value, like, he really is pretty good when he's on his game, and he's got the job now because obviously at the very end, Tyler McGill didn't put his best foot forward. He's going to get his opportunities, but as it stands, David Peterson's going to pitch the second game. They said they're going to probably send him down for another reliever, but he'll be back up. If Peterson pitches well, he's up. I mean, we need a lefty anyway. So if you're at the end of your draft, especially in the more shallow formats and the deeper ones, Peterson's going to go for sure. But yeah, put him on the top of put him in your put him on your list and your queue in the end of your draft when you're like searching for innings. David Peterson is very solid, and yeah, if we've seen him figure things out, and you just never know. Lefties take a while sometimes, and maybe this is the year where he kind of puts it all together. Worst case scenario, you move on, but David Peterson has got to be one of the better options where he's going in drafts.
Yeah, I definitely put him on as a little star on the waiver wire for Peterson. With the rest of the rotation as well, finishing off your rotation, I kind of ended my 10-team league, taking a chance on Kodai Senga in the rotation. Is he obviously him and What about Carlos Carrasco? Are these guys that you can put at the end of the rotation? I know Kodai Senga may not give us the innings. Carlos Carrasco last year, there was a lot of games where he went into the 8th inning. Would you take a flyer on him?
I prefer Senga, obviously. I actually prefer Peterson to Carrasco. Carrasco always kind of worries me. He's already got I know he goes through the elbow management every year, even when he was with the Indians/Guardians. He always had that thing in spring training where he would go through that. So I don't mind picking up Cookie. I think I mean, Senga is definitely far and away the option of the three, and then it just depends on how much risk I took. If I had a pretty safe team and I just wanted to grab some guy that could potentially do really well and I could take on some risk, I'll take Carrasco at the end. But most teams by then you've taken a risk early, and I would probably rather go with like a safer arm. But he's going late enough where it's not necessarily a huge problem. Senga, for example, I mean Senga's going up where. Trying to think of where he's like Reed Detmers is a really popular sleeper guy. Sonny Gray, he's just one of those kind of boring, but he gives you a lot of statistics there. Like he's going around where there's some kind of surefire options, whereas Carrasco is going much later in the draft. So if you have the ability to take on the risk, I think Carrasco is perfectly fine.
I love that you mentioned, trying to put your fandom away. And that's, basically what you have to do when you're playing fantasy baseball. It's a lot different. It's a lot different than, just sitting and watching your team play. I had the first pick in the draft. Obviously, I'm not going to take a Met, hoping that maybe Pete Alonso would come around the second time. Seeing a lot on the NFBC, his ranking was probably around, I'm thinking it was like 15 through 19 that I saw.
That's where he goes.
Yeah, so I was hoping in the 8-team league that I was in, because this was a smaller league, that he would kind of wrap around to me. Didn't end up happening. So I kind of drafted a lot of Braves. It's crazy to say. It's kind of like I have the New York Braves on my team. I got Acuna with the first pick. I took a chance on Olsen. Obviously, he's a top first baseman after Pete. Ozzie Albies, because the second base was very, very slim to choose from. And then Austin Riley at third. It was weird that I have them all on one team, because once they're all off on a day, you kind of lose those stats. But, you got to think outside of, just taking these Mets when you come with the picks, especially also like Francisco Lindor as well. He's more of like, I guess, a 3rd to 4th rounder. You would place him in, correct?
About the 3rd round.
3rd round. Yeah, so it's
in an 8-team league, he'd be deeper. I mean, he'd be like 4th round. But yeah, in like a standard like 12-team league, yeah, like mid to end of 3rd.
Yeah, so you gotta, I guess, put away your fandom when you want to try to win this thing.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's two kinds of fans: the ones that obsess over their own players and then go out and overdraft them, or kind of the way I draft is like I'm more critical of them, and I actually end up with less Mets. I mean, just because I know what they're aware of, and I guess I'm just kind of maybe I'm too aware of my own bias, where I just end up not drafting them or something. So who knows what it is? But yeah, especially like in season, like you can't. Especially when it comes, like you said, you drafted your Braves, you can't shut off a whole division. A player pool from a whole division just because you don't want to root for them. I mean, you almost got to remove the faces and the names, and you got to put some, just remember that's basically you're rooting for statistics. And in the end, let's say, the Braves are facing the Mets. If we whip them down and those players do poorly, the Mets win. Hey, we're happy as Mets fans. But hey, if we're going to lose, you might as well get something out of it.
That's the best way to think about it. Do you also, because I know you're in a lot of leagues, do you also do DFS as well?
No, I used to. I love it. But right now I work over the game day, and it's a lot of his sports betting. So other than season long fantasy, I've moved away from daily fantasy sports to actually daily sports betting. So that is where my focus on for the most part.
Well, Matt, I can't thank you enough for joining me again. We're going to get you on during the season to talk Mets, get some games on, talk about the Mets. But I wanted to do this, get the fantasy preview out there, especially for all the Met players. And it's kind of like a reality check, because we're talking about, not taking some of the Mets that are out there as well. Actually, one last question before I let you go. I know people may or may not go for, a Brandon Nimmo. I did take him a little bit later on in my 10-team draft. I didn't go for Jeff McNeil because our league doesn't do batting average, and I
Mhm.
feel like that's probably where the best stats lie for him. So I kind of stood away from a Jeff McNeil. When you're drafting these two guys, McNeil and Nimmo, what stats obviously are you looking for? A lot of walks, obviously, from Nimmo, the batting average from Jeff McNeil. Anything else that brings you to possibly drafting them later on in the rounds?
Well, this is an important thing for fantasy. Know your format, know your rules. Every league is so different, and every ranking you look at is so different because if you're looking at someone's rankings and they're basing it off of roto or points, completely different. One of the best things, the best tips for anyone I can do, everyone at this point in their life, if you're a baseball fan, Fangraphs. Go to fangraphs.com. It's a great site. Go up to the top, it says projections. There you can see popular projections like ATC, the BAT, the BAT X, and you can go in there and see all the stats. The thing you really want as a fantasy player is at the very bottom of the projections drop-down navigation is auction calculator. You're not in an auction league. I get that. I mean, maybe you are. Auctions are awesome, but you don't care. When you open it up, there's going to be a bunch of things, but the main thing that pops up here is roto and points, and you can click off, and it allows you to put in your exact settings. Like roto, you can just click the categories you want, or you go over to points and you can actually put in the exact point totals that you have for your entire league. And then you can go in there and put like how many teams there are, how many different players you have to roster at each position, bench, and all that. And then at the very below that, it allows you to pick the projection system you like. If you prefer the BAT, you like Fangraphs, you like ATC, whatever, and then generate projections. On the right-hand side, it's going to give you a dollar amount. That is for if you're in an auction league, but that is a ranking. And it'll actually give you imperfect, but it actually gives you a kind of ranked system and a pair of rankings that are tailored for your league, which is very great, especially when there's so many leagues with different sizes and different roster settings, different point values. So if you punch everything in there, it'll actually tell you, especially for players like McNeil and players like Brandon Nimmo, where are you counting doubles? Are you counting walks? Do you get a bonus for certain things? Like if you're not counting batting average, yeah, maybe if you're not in roto and you're not counting batting average, maybe Jeff McNeil's not as valuable. But if you're in a points league that is giving you points for singles and doubles and everything like that, he could have value. Just depending on your format. So it's just really important. So again, if you want to run it back just real quick though, Fangraphs, go to the drop-down projections, go to auction calculator and mess around with it. Put in your league settings. It'll help you out tremendously. Even, even in season, if you want to like make trades and stuff, you can kind of go in there and get an idea of what people are worth.
Well, Matt, this was great insight, not only on the Mets, but just on how to play fantasy. I know it's a tough game. There's a lot of different categories and a lot of different point systems and a lot of different leagues. So I really feel that this information really can help. And I appreciate you coming on. Let everyone know what you're working on now.
Sure. You can find, you could always chase me down on Twitter, MATTWI77IAMS. Always happy to answer your questions about, I love talking Mets, love talking fantasy, sports betting, whatever you want to do. So I'm over at the Game Day, thegameday.com, pretty much putting out daily baseball content over there on a daily basis. So I always retweet it out there if you're on social media. Otherwise, yeah, thegameday.com, everything under MLB is pretty much me. And Frank Amarante, who's a great dude as well. So thanks for having me on. Let's go Mets. Let's take down the fish here.
Yeah, absolutely. We got Max Scherzer taking the hill for the first game. Obviously, David Peterson going to game 2 and Verlander game 3. It's so weird to see them split up, but
well, it's weird. Hey, seven games, no game off, no day off.
Yeah,
what is this?
Yeah. That was. I think this is the first time I've ever seen that.
Yeah. But hey, we're in two domes essentially.
Yeah. I can't complain. They're in the nice weather in Florida, in Miami, so it's going to work out perfectly. Matt Williams, thanks so much for joining us, the lead MLB editor for the GameDay.com. I did retweet your latest piece, which was the MLB predictions. So please check that out on my Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. Listen to the Subway to Shea podcast and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Don't forget to follow my work for Rising Apple. Rising Apple is a New York Mets site on the Fan-Sided Network, and you can read my articles by going to risingapple.com and follow them on Twitter at Rising Apple Blog and at Fan-Sided. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and leave me some comments. I want to read what you got to say. So leave me some comments. I want to hear from you. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can get all the notifications and updates from this channel. For Anthony Rivera, you've been listening to, or actually you've been watching. I'm so used to saying you've been listening to, but now you've been watching Subway to Shea.